Thank you.
Thank
Good
you.
evening, everyone. The hour being 5:04. We called to order the duly noticed meeting of the Charter Commission, which was noticed for this date and time. And at the outset, I would just like to note that pursuant to Governor Baker's June 16, 2021 order extending certain provisions of the open meeting law, Mass General Laws, Chapter 30A, Section 18, and an extension to allow for remote participation until July 15th, 2022. The May 10th Charter Review Committee meeting will be conducted via remote participation by the committee. And I've been asked to move the acceptance of the minutes further down the agenda, and we'll do that right before we do the citizen participation, if any, if that's acceptable to the committee. Okay, so the first item that I have on the agenda is to discussion and leading to a vote to recommend the select board to appoint Attorney Goldberg as special legal counsel for the Charter Review Committee.
So moved.
Can we have a little discussion? I agree. But
Yeah, we did.
You can have a discussion after a second.
Second.
Okay, second. So it has been moved and seconded that we recommend to the select board that we appoint Attorney Goldberg as special counsel for the Charter Review Commission. Before we take the vote, we can let's have a little discussion. Lauren, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Glad to be here.
As those of you on the committee know, last time we did this, Lauren was our special counsel and rendered invaluable service to us. And we're very happy that she is willing to and able to assist us again upon the select board's approval. Does anybody have any questions for Lauren before I give her a minute or two to tell us a little bit about?
Well, why don't we let Lauren do that? Then I do have a couple of questions. Just
Sure. Lauren, you mind just, a lot of us know it, but for those who are watching and new to the committee, can you just give us a little précis of your distinguished career?
Certainly. And thank you again for having me here. So my name is Lauren Goldberg, and I am the managing attorney at KP Law. I've been there since the year 2000, and part of my everyday work is charter bylaw interpretation, drafting, and the process for getting approval. I work in we represent over 130 cities and towns, so I have a lot of access to and experience with other communities governing documents, which really turns out to be of great assistance when there's something you want to accomplish. And I can say to you, let's look at how it worked there, or let's make that actually, for Westwood and not for whatever other community. There certainly is no such thing as a cookie cutter charter and no such thing as cookie cutter advice. I started my career at the Public Records Division in 1996 when I was 5, and okay, a few months. I was there through. I started in the Public Records Division. I went to the Elections Division, and so when I came to the firm, I continued to utilize both of those experiences and have been providing support to clients ever since. I do, as I said, I do a lot of regular work with our city solicitor and town council clients on charters, bylaws, et cetera. But I also work with elected and appointed charter review committees, such as this one, essentially dive into their governing documents, what they're looking to accomplish, give them ideas about how to move forward, and or scribe when my opinion is not needed or wanted. I'm pretty good at that too. To make sure that the process goes smoothly, and so that and what the timeline is for this committee's recommendation, and then any town meeting action that might follow.
Yeah, Nancy, did you have some questions?
Yeah, Lauren, in your letter you mentioned some particularly important / complex charters that you've reviewed. And you said it's not cookie cutter. We're not all the same. You know us from the past, but are you able to inform us of trends that are occurring across the state that might be relevant to us?
Oh, absolutely. Not only do I look at, specific intentional charter reviews, but I review any number of warrants for for our town council client, our town, town council clients. And so we see everything that goes by. I actually, for our regular clients, will say, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? And an easy one is to make language in the charter gender neutral. That's been almost a must do across the board, changing chairman to chair, and references internally from, he or she to the select board chair or the town administrator. So we've seen a ton of that. We've seen a lot of work being done to define the relationships between elected committees and their staff people, who are often managed by appointed town staff, and how that works and what the relationship ought to be versus what it might be. Looked at, the changes in Amherst. I think they changed from a town form of government to a city form of government. Also did that with North Attleboro. And so really a very broad kind of take on what is happening out there in the forms of governance, and the ability to, if it's not something I know offhand about, I certainly have the resources to follow up on that.
Okay. That's great, because I know, we're aware of a lot of input we need to receive from boards, committees, the public, but having your expertise beyond the Westwood boundaries would be very informative. Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Can I ask you a question, Lauren? What's the most important best practices that you've seen over the past couple of years in terms of changes in the charter?
Yeah. So I think there's a couple of things. The first would be to look at what's in the charter to decide if it really ought to be there. Some communities have very, very detailed charters where essentially, it's impossible to comply with the timelines. It's impossible to meet the different requirements for calling or holding a meeting and or for addressing the budget. So we've seen a lot of attention paid to the budget process, and taking out some of the particular detail to be instead inserted in the bylaws. So it can be more realistic over time. Removing all transition provisions is something that I really encourage. Anything that says, the first blah, 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 the first member appointed shall have a term of X or Y, all of that stuff take out, double check all of the citations to the general laws. There's often changes between charter reviews, and it makes sense to refer to them generally instead of to keep having to, for example, increase the public bidding requirements every time the public bidding law changes. So we've seen a bunch of that. We've seen, as I said, a lot of hard work between the executive and the legislative branch and of government, and how the mechanics of that work, particularly for situations where a board has a statutory responsibility, and the question of, who can assist with the day-to-day, who's the right person to deal with an HR issue, those kinds of things really do wind up becoming much bigger than I think they have to. And so looking at the language in the charter to kind of specify that. Another really common change that we're seeing is to allow a town administrator or manager to approve warrants for payment with a report to the select board. That has to be done by charter still, even though a member of the select board could do it on their own and report it. So that's something that we see a lot of. What else? We've actually been dealing with a lot of questions, just kind of on a general basis on use of municipal facilities and who's in charge of taking care of them and who's in charge of deciding how they're going to be used. And again, these are things that may not be applicable here in Westwood. And, you know, one of the things that makes every charter different is every town has its own personality, its own goals. So, you know, obviously you direct the direction in which this goes. And as Selectman Hyde said, you know, my job, as I see it, is really to provide you with the support that you need to make decisions on how you want to handle things. So it's really, I guess if I had to summarize all that, I would say it's really about whether what's in the charter, and I know we talked about this last time, is what's in the charter working? Is it like that in reality? Or do we like what we're seeing in reality and want to make the charter match what's really going on? So I think it's a really good exercise and a good place to start. And as was mentioned, definitely seeking input, even though you're not a statutory committee, taking the time to involve the public and hear from the public, I find to be very useful, especially towards the end of the process, when you're trying to explain the things that you've decided to recommend to move forward. So.
Question, and if I might, Mr. Chair, and I'm not asking for you to give us the guidance yet, but is the area of how town meeting operates, specifically how we have in Westwood, aye or nay, indefinite postponement, those procedures, is that something that you've seen towns try to tackle to be, might I call it more user-friendly?
Absolutely. Typically, though, that's done by bylaw or rule rather than by charter.
Okay.
But you can put something in the charter that directs that those matters be addressed, you know, first by the bylaws and then by town meeting time, for example, if it's not covered in the bylaws.
Okay, thanks.
So, Mr. Chairman, if I may,
Yes, certainly, Pat.
so 2 out of the last 3 years, we've had to reduce the quorum.
Mhm.
The first time we had to go to court to do it and get a court order. This year, the legislation provided us with a pathway to do it statutorily, and we did. Are you seeing trends to not have quorums in some cities and towns?
That's a really good question, Pat. In a lot of towns, there is no quorum. Open town meeting, whoever shows up gets to vote. And if you care about an issue, then it's incumbent upon you to be there when it's discussed at town meeting. There are other towns, though, that have a very strong belief that they want to make sure that the town is being represented, the townspeople, and they don't want, you know, the 50 active voters to kind of dictate to the rest of the community. And in those communities, they do have quorum requirements. Some are simple, like, you know, 20 or 30 or 50, and some are more significant. One of the things I think that Chapter 22 of the Acts of 2022 does is it makes it clear there is a process, right, to reduce the quorum. And so we've written some of that in to charters as we've been looking at these things during pandemic times. And the other thing, and certainly Dottie can speak to this better than me, but a lot of towns had language in their charters about the date of their election. That was a huge problem because although you can delay the date of town meeting under state law, regardless of what a charter or special act says, you don't have that same ability with respect to an election. And so we've written in some flexibility for that as well.
Using both the select board and or the registrars?
So we have for moving the date of the election, we've had the select board be the decision maker because it's their warrant and they get to decide. But depending on the community, we've said in consultation with the moderator, in consultation with the clerk, or in consultation with the registrars. Not every town has an active board. So yeah, and that the nice thing is when you're doing a charter, you have the ability to include the officials that you think obviously are appropriate. So, you know, that's a nice thing that the special legislation doesn't really get to. And I do think it's going to expire, and we're going to be in a situation where if you want that kind of flexibility, you have to carve it out for yourselves.
One other question. Are you seeing any movement for one of the things that I noticed in the last election, the last few elections, is there were a number of uncontested seats. Are you seeing any towns alter their charter to make certain committees appointed rather than elected?
100%, all the time. And the town of Tingsboro, they tried to do a charter change a few years ago, and they made a chart and look back about 10 years to show how few positions had been contested, and talked about how hard it is to find volunteers, let alone to find people who are willing to run. Under state law, under the Chapter 43B, Section 20, virtually any position can be made elected or appointed. And because of that, there's, there is a flexibility to change, whether it be the Conservation Commission or Planning Board or Zoning Board of Appeals, and to change the size. And I believe that we dealt with appointing associate members in the last go around, but
We did.
yeah, we see a lot of that in this notion of what it means to be able to exercise your right to vote. So, there's a whole policy debate over, the people have more of input if they, or at least the argument goes, if they're voting directly for someone. However, as you all know, if there's one person on the ballot, that person wins. So it's less of a choice at that time. So yes, we're seeing even some finance committees where there's some appointed, but some elected. And we've seen a few other boards where the goal has been to kind of make it somewhat of a hybrid. But I would say that it is definitely a trend for volunteer boards to be appointed more often than elected. And one of the things that's really important about that is the conflict of interest law. So under the conflict of interest law, if you're appointed, you can request an exemption to participate under particular circumstances. If you're elected, if you have any kind of financial interest or your family members do, you're flatly prohibited from participating. And so if what you're looking for is feedback from neighborhoods or from particular, people with home occupations, et cetera, it's kind of nice to have that flexibility to be able to approve exemptions.
Mr. Chairman,
Certainly, Peter.
could I? So I think with even these, I don't want to derail the momentum and the flow of the discussion, but I think based upon these few questions, it's sort of Ms. Goldberg's expertise and vast wealth of knowledge in this area reveals itself. And the idea and the preference and desire to have and ask her for her availability for this task force isn't merely just because, well, she assisted with the prior one. It's because she was so tremendously knowledgeable and helpful in the process. That is why we wanted, and I think the sense of several of us were hoping she would be available for this process. So again, I think we can continue in terms of the Q&A and asking her about issues, but I would like to move the question to actually hire Attorney Goldberg and at least get the sense of that before we continue to continue to ask these kinds of questions, if we may.
Anybody object to moving the question? It has been moved and duly seconded that this committee recommend to the board and that they appointed Attorney Lauren Goldberg as a special legal counsel for the Charter Review Committee. Any further discussion? The question's been moved. Call the roll. Member Powers,
Yes.
Member Coleman,
Just a point of order.
Yes.
I don't believe I'm a voting
oh,
member.
you're ex officio.
Ex officio.
That's right. Member Hyde,
Yes.
Member Cahill,
Yes.
and I think Pat, you're ex officio as well.
I believe I am.
Yes. And then Member Locknane,
Yes.
And the chair also votes in the affirmative. So it is unanimously adopted that we recommend to the Board of Selectmen that they appoint Lauren as the special counsel. So you'll take it from that point, Peter, Chris, in terms of presenting to the selectmen.
Yes, I will, Mr. Chair.
You need anybody at that meeting?
I can certainly reach out to you or Peter, but I will also be in contact with Attorney Goldberg regarding a contract. And we can certainly dot the i's and cross the t's.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Lauren. There's one point that you made that I think is important. To learn from what we had to, the loops we had to jump to before because of the pandemic. So I think that's what you're talking about in terms of putting in the charter, greater flexibility. Because I know, and Pat and Nancy would and Chris would know this as well. We had to wait for a lot of special acts to be passed, but to do things that we needed to do but couldn't do because of the pandemic. So I assume that that's something you've seen as a best practice, that kind of flexibility.
Well, if you're asking my opinion, I would say it is an advantage to have flexibility so that you don't have to, for example, go to court to be able to move a date of your election or any of those kinds of things. In addition, I think prior to the pandemic, no one really understood there's already some flexibility in the law, but that there can be more. So people are concerned that the hybrid meetings are going to be prohibited again, or that they're just going to be in-person meetings. There's concerns over the reduction of the quorum language. There's concerns for for representative town meetings about the remote town meeting process and what it means to be remote. I think we're going to see a lot of legislation, special legislation, but more likely charters that are trying to deal with that. Those have been kind of windows onto the way things could be. And I think the legislature has so many things going on. I just don't see them having the time to fully vet these types of things on a statewide basis. Will they? I think they probably will at some point, but it doesn't hurt to get a jump on those issues.
And if you could raise those to us as as part of as you're going through the charter, we'd appreciate it, because we might, your issue spotting on that would be very helpful to us.
Absolutely. I can't help myself, that.
Did anybody else have any specific questions?
No, I just want to say I agree with what Peter said. Hearing from you, Lauren, and sort of covering the scope of a few questions, I think is very strong indication of why we want to hire you. And we really are excited that you're available to work with us. I think that it would be very valuable.
Thank you. I very much appreciate the kind words, and I really enjoyed my experience working with the town the last time, and I'm glad to be around for the next version. So thank you for including me.
The next item we have on the agenda is follow-up from last meeting. And as the members will recall, we had asked Chris to highlight some issues that he would like to put on the table. They've been noted in the minutes, and I know we've all made notes about them. At this point, is there anybody who wants to raise any other issues that we can just have out there before we talk about where we go from here? That's part of the next item agenda, which would be discuss the charter area we'd like to reference. I know we do, Chris asked us to address the elected town treasurer and town collector position, particularly given since we're losing our very able municipal finance director. We know the quorum is an issue. There's some big ones that I think we would really need to get a lot of input from the citizens on, in my opinion, which would be to go to a representative town meeting or a town council form of government. That's something we could discuss, but those I think would really need to, we'd be hard pressed, I think, if just to present that to people without a lot of feedback, education, because it would significantly alter the way we do things.
In terms of issues to address, though, I think that squarely is one just to explore and see
Yeah.
if we come back to the same decision, and adding to the list of possibilities is expanding the number of the selectmen.
Right, which is something we looked at last time, and also some people were advocating for precinct representation on the select board. The membership of the FinCom, and I know that town moderator is interested in that, and he also was wondering about, not that he's advocating for it, but the question of his term, 1 or 3 years. That's something we looked at last time, and we should explore that again.
Historically, Paul,
Yep,
we looked at one point in time, the clerk, the moderator, the tax collector, and the treasurer are all 1-year terms. And
right.
we changed all but one. And at the time, the current moderator wanted to remain a
Yes.
1-year term.
Right, so that's something I think we should explore again. I could think of pros and cons, just as I
Right.
mentioned.
A long list.
What's
And-
that?
I said a long list of pros and
Yeah.
cons.
Yes, the procurement issues, which is Lauren, you referenced to give us more flexibility as chapter 30B changes all the time, and the emergency management director issue. And then and I think this is what you were getting at too. We do a lot of things by mail, booklets, notices. So look at that again. And that's what I think you had highlighted for us, right, Chris, at the last meeting?
Yes.
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 Is there any other ones that have occurred to you in the interim?
And Paul, if I may,
Hmm.
I think another good way to look at this too is we should really take a look, piece by piece at the existing charter. And we also have a lot of inconsistencies between the existing charter and the bylaws. I think we want to look at each piece and, some of the suggestions that Lauren had as well. I think that would be worthwhile, just going through each section.
Which is what I think we did, Peter. You
Yes.
did last time. You want to
We
speak to
did.
how we did it last time, Peter?
I'm sorry?
Would you speak to how we did it last time? And that might help guide.
Oh,
some
sure.
of the project timeline.
Sure. Yeah, it was almost a 2-year process, and it started with surveying most all of the key boards and functions in town. We had probably be useful to circulate to everybody the cover letter of our report that we sent, and I know Dottie was going to look for the appendices, but we had brought in Marilyn Contreras, who gave for a meeting. These were all public meetings, and she shared her thoughts, and she was from the Massachusetts Department of Housing and Community Development, and at that time in particular was a recognized authority on charter revisions. So at the beginning of the process, we invited her in, and she accepted and came in. But then we had open meetings with the Board of Selectmen, School Committee, Finance Commission, now Warrant and Finance Commission, Town Moderator, Town Clerk, Finance, Planning Board, Assessors, Town Council, Town Administrator, and the Permanent Building Committee. All of those representatives from all of those agencies came in. We had sent in advance of that a survey, which I also have, that they were exploratory questions. How is it working? What's the nature of the function of your role versus within the town structure? How is it working? Any suggestions on improvements? That kind of thing, open-ended kinds of questions designed to elicit feedback and thoughts and opinions from all the different parts of town, see how they were functioning. So that occurred over months. And then we did establish very specific public outreach with multiple sessions where they were open and folks could come in, and we invited some specific speakers to come, particularly some past members of the Board of Selectmen and those that we knew were experienced in volunteering for the town, to solicit their some thoughts. But then it was also open for anybody to come and share thoughts and opinions. And so we had some feedback that way. And then it culminated with a recommendation and for actual amendments. And Lauren helped with how that process actually needed to occur and the vote before town meeting. And we also went before Finance Commission ourselves and the Board of Selectmen. So it's pretty involved and thorough. And I think that sort of while it was a bit of an endeavor for all of the members of the committee and everybody that was helping us, it still it did allow us to say at the end and point and have a thorough extensive process where we felt like we really evaluated the charter and gave a really fair and honest effort at trying to make improvements to it. And it wasn't just a quick couple weeks and here we go and let's just make one or two changes. So it was very thoughtful, I thought, and I think could be a model for how this task force decides to approach the challenge here.
And to your point, Dottie, we did spend parts of meetings going through section by section, the members themselves, and just saying, yep.
Yeah, and the bylaw
Yeah.
question point, Dottie is spot on in terms of citing and raising that there will likely be, we can uncover inconsistencies, aware of some already. And while that is probably beyond the scope of this specific committee, perhaps it could be we could have an end product that has very specific suggestions along those lines that then the Board of Selectmen could do something with and consider with Dottie's guidance, so that group isn't starting totally from scratch. So maybe there could be something useful on that front, the interaction between the charter and the bylaws to make that a little.
Peter, I was
more
thinking that
user-friendly.
we should be careful on that though, because some things in the charter may need to change because the better place is the representation in the bylaws. So I think maybe you're not saying this, but I do think we need to look at the bylaws and the charter together to ferret, sort of tease out those inconsistencies and see if they matter to any of the charter content.
Yeah.
And the
So-
last time the Charter Review Committee was followed immediately by a bylaw review committee.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that we change things in the charter where we think that that's the
Right.
leading
Sure.
place of change that becomes necessary. I don't know.
Well, then
And-
can I suggest a course of action? If Peter, if you could share the surveys that we used the last time to all of us, and why don't we between now and the next meeting go through those and see what we need to change, what we need to tweak. And then I would think that over the summer, we could distribute the surveys and give people an opportunity to respond to them and have those responses by the end of the summer, beginning of September, and then proceed, which we did last time, to having the public sessions, inviting people in to talk about the surveys and their response. And there was a lot of good question and answer, as Pat had indicated when we were talking to the moderator at the time. He expressed a desire for a one-year term, and we ultimately adopted that. And in the meantime, if Lauren, if you could give us some stuff on some of the best practices that you discussed, and also point out to us the issue spotting we talked about things that we need to think about, because we all hope not, but there could be another pandemic or emergencies when we need to have as maximum flexibility. Knock on wood, right?
Yeah, nothing like a pandemic to point out how structured you are and how your hands are tied because of that structure.
But does that seem like a viable plan from this point on?
I have a question, Paul, if I
Yes.
may. I've given some thought to the timeline, and as we talk about this and we talk about being comprehensive and engaging with many people to get their input, it strikes me that we may come across some items that are really clear that we want to change. Let's say the town moderator,
Mhm.
that, you know, unanimously, we feel that that should change and change now. Would we be in a position to consider phase one, phase two presentation, so that if we want something to go to town meeting in 2023, we tee it up for January, when that process really gets underway, to say that there are a couple things while we're reviewing the charter that we know we want to bring forward? Might we consider that, or is that a
Well, I think with all,
showstopper?
I think what we, last time we did have it ratified by a town election, which is not, my understanding at the time was it was not required, but the legislature looked much more favorably on your home rule petition if it included a provision that it would be subsequently subject to a town election. Is that still sort of the atmosphere, Lauren, up there?
It is. So there are two ways to change the charter. And I think I know we talked about this before. One of the ways is to request special legislation. It's a majority vote at town meeting. There's no requirement in the Constitution or in the general laws that it be subject to local acceptance. However, when significant changes are made, I do think, just based on my experience, that the general court looks more favorably on action because they're not making a decision for all of the voters of the town. That being said, there's a lot of special acts that don't require any kind of local acceptance and that do things like, change terms or numbers, that kind of thing of board members. The other way to do a charter change is under Chapter 43B, Section 10. And that section basically says, as long as you're not making changes to the legislative body, the town manager, the select board, am I missing anyone? That anything other than those things can be subject to a 2/3 vote at town meeting and then appear on the ballot 90 days after they're submitted to the Attorney General for review. So the benefit of doing or taking that route is the town gets to dictate the process, and a timeline is very clear. The general court, I think, has had a lot on its plate. And so I know several towns that are still waiting, and I'm not being disparaging at all. I know the legislature has, their hands full up to there. But that is something to consider. Would you rather present the proposals to town meeting and then go straight to the ballot? Or would you rather go to town meeting, go to the general court, and then maybe go to the ballot? So
Interesting. So there are a lot of layers on the onion, I guess.
yes,
Could you work up a memo to us
yes,
outlining those different, because it may be something we should talk about.
Yeah.
The flexibility things that we feel we need, we may want to move with sooner or later, right? Just in case something happens.
So to Nancy's point, I wonder though, if particularly if we can set in motion a survey process over the course of the summer and have feedback at the beginning or at the end of the summer, then, could it be that we set a calendar to have this process completed by December? And then to Nancy's, Nancy's asking, well, there might be some obvious items we want to change. Well, maybe we target trying to see if we can
Right.
have a full sense of maybe we're done with the review and suggestions, and we have one package of edits to the charter at that point.
Mr. Chair, if
Yes.
I will say in a lot of communities, they do what are referred to as ministerial, editorial, looking at internal consistency and all those kinds of things. They do those in one vote. So let's say you could present that at a town meeting, it could go to the Attorney General, it could go on the ballot to be dealt with. Then there are things that are more controversial, and typically I categorize those as, substantive, but not something that the commission, the task force in this case, has some, coalesces around, and then some things that really are big questions for the community, which are the most controversial. And so my thought on this is that if there are things that you all agree are not likely to be debated too much, you could make a presentation in the fall on that part of this only and get it on the ballot next year, if that's what you want to do. It's not required, obviously, but I do think that when you're talking about kind of the types of changes that you're thinking about, there are tiers. And so like, tier 1, non-controversial, tier 2, more substantive, tier 3. So a tier 3 would be maybe changing a board from elected to appointed, consolidating a position, creating a new department, basically the biggest picture items. And then the middle ones could be, you were referring to the town meeting process, and some things that are more that are substantive, but that don't really cause a lot of disagreement. So I think that framework does a lot of good in that it helps clarify for the public, what about this is hard and what about this isn't hard.
I think of things like, since we last met with you, Lauren, on the last charter change, we did small things like change Board of Selectmen to Select Board. But to me, it was remarkable how long it took to get the state to okay what we were strongly supportive of in town. It barely garnered any discussion. And I know that's not the case everywhere, but it took the state legislature a long time to tell us it was okay. So I'm just thinking like some things we may really want to get done, maybe the flexibility
Right.
during disaster, and say, we know it takes a while, so we really don't want to wait till the end of maybe a 2-year period to get that in motion. So that's really why I bring it up, because it just does seem like things take a long time.
What you were talking about, Lauren, sounds akin to the housekeeping zoning articles that we have at just about every town meeting.
Yes,
Which
exactly.
obviously has to follow the process of a planning board report and the 2/3 vote and all, and approval by the Attorney General. But we could potentially do sort of a technical housekeeping from what you're saying, and do the charter that way, at least first phase.
Absolutely, Mr. Chair. And I should just clarify too one thing. If, let's say, there was a discussion about changing the form of the legislative body or changing the size of the select board from 3 to 5, that has to be done through a special act because the Constitution requires it. So it either requires an elected charter commission, which is not what we're dealing with right now, or a special act. So, it may be that there are 2 routes that, that are ultimately recommended. One route for the less big picture issues, to have that move forward, and then one, that if in fact we need that special legislation, proceeds on that track as well.
I think that sounds like a viable way to go about it. Let's see what I think Peter was suggesting is let's see what we get for the survey. Let's see what we get from the issues that we talk about and what Lauren provides us. And maybe in September, we say in a couple of months, we could prepare a phase 1 article, town meeting article that would require 2/3 and then an election within 90 days. Is that?
Yeah, it's a 2/3 vote at town meeting, and then it goes to the Attorney General, who reviews it to make sure it's, I'm quoting now, not inconsistent with the Constitution and the laws of the Commonwealth. And so it's 90 days from the date the town submits the proposed amendment to the Attorney General. And the only election at which these can be considered without a special act is the annual election. So you can back up from that and try to figure out when that 90 days would be, when would that occur, and see if there's a timeline in there that works for y'all.
Might have to
On
be.
its face, that does not sound good.
Lauren, Mr. Chairman, if I may,
Yes.
or are you saying the Attorney General turn things around in 90 days on a regular basis? Or,
Yeah,
because last year it took 2 extensions to get our zoning bylaws through.
so under the state law, the Attorney General has 30 days to review the proposed charter amendments and issue their opinion. And if they don't, then you're cleared to proceed.
Constructively approved.
Yeah.
Yes,
Constructive
it's
yeah.
30 days. And it's true, I think with the bylaws, especially where there are controversial issues, there are extensions requested, especially with zoning, especially if there's a procedural problem that they're trying to address, or if it's, if it touches certain areas, that are less settled, it can take a little bit longer. But the AG will do the charter amendments within 30 days. And just to, to follow up, last time we did talk to the Attorney General before we went to town meeting about what was being proposed so that it wouldn't be a surprise. And we had, obviously they don't ever issue formal opinions ahead of time, but as I recall, there was nothing that had, raised concern. And I find that to be really useful. So we don't have to then make a change at the very last minute so that it can go on the ballot.
So I would suggest then that if Peter, if you wouldn't mind sending us the surveys, and Dottie, anything that you would think would be helpful to us, and we could set a meeting before the summer commences, if that's agreeable to the committee, go over the surveys, have those sort of done and ready to go, and then ask Chris through your good offices to help us get those out and encourage a response to that. Does that seem like a viable course of action?
Yes.
Yeah, and Peter, you should send it to Jess for
Just me.
distribution to the committee.
Oh,
Did you
okay.
say something, Chris?
Yeah, if you,
Yeah, Chris.
my suggestion is that, Peter, if you send it to me, we
Yeah.
can certainly disperse it to the committee.
Okay.
Right.
No
and-
replies to all.
Exactly.
Okay.
Right. And so do we want to pick a date in June to try to, work
It's
on
time in
these?
June.
I
So,
would like, I think.
Mr. Chair, if I may,
try to get those out. Yes, Mr.
Just to remind the committee, we tentatively have our next meeting is scheduled for May 24th.
Mhm.
So if there's something you're looking to do in June, I don't know if you're looking at the week of June 6th or the week of June 13th.
Right. If people think we could do it on the 24th, I'm certainly not adverse to that. Is that something we think we could look
Yes.
at and be ready to talk about on the 24th?
Fine.
Then why don't we keep that? Why don't we keep that then, if that's acceptable?
Okay.
It's my intention, Peter, to rotate and ask you to preside at the next meeting. So.
Well, let's get to the
Go
minutes
ahead.
before we get to that.
As co-chair.
I think,
Peter,
I think,
Peter,
I
you're
think
being
that
lured in.
the minutes gave me a promotion that I didn't realize I had.
I noticed that. Yeah, I think you were
Yeah,
trying to
I
say
noticed that
be
too.
vice,
Mm.
vice
Well, we
versus
could like-
co.
No. All right, so we have a meeting. We'll go forward on the 24th at also, is it at 5 p.m., Chris? Would you mind? What?
That's what
That
I
was
have
a
in my book.
suggestion. Yes.
Yeah. Is that acceptable to everybody?
Yeah.
Okay.
John Loughnane, I don't know if John's able to chime in. I thought that day was okay with him before.
I believe it is. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, John.
Okay. Right. Are there any citizens who are listening and participating in the meeting that would like to have an opportunity for public participation? Jess, can you tell, do we have anybody?
There is one person, but I don't see any hand raised or anything.
Okay, do we have a name or,
It's Marjorie.
oh, is it Marjorama? No.
It
I think
only the
she's-
first name.
I think she's just a participant.
Oh.
I think she's
Correct.
just viewing.
Okay,
Okay.
well, does, obviously, anybody who is viewing, we will at every meeting have an opportunity to, get some comments or thoughts. And does Marjorie want to say anything to the best of my knowledge?
I don't see anything in the Q&A and she's not
Okay.
raising her hand. So
Great.
Yeah, she would be muted, right? Jess, I'm sorry. Is that
She
how
is-
that
she
text-
is muted. I can have her talk, but usually they can either type in the Q&A or she can raise her hand.
Yeah, so let's, that's fair. I wouldn't want to put any of our attendees on the spot, and it's
Right.
sort of allow them,
We
you
want-
know,
right.
to raise a hand if they so
Right.
choose.
Okay, is there any other business at this point in time? Well, seeing none. So Peter, we appreciate you pulling that stuff together and sending it to us, and Dottie as well. And just let us know, Chris, if you need anybody to appear at the select board meeting when you present our recommendation regarding Lauren.
Sure.
Happy to do that. I will accept the motion to adjourn.
Wait, wait,
Minutes.
I'm sorry, minutes.
We haven't done
Oh,
minutes.
you're right, minutes. You're right. I'm sorry. Thank you,
No,
Jess.
that's okay.
Yeah, the acceptance of the minutes from the April 5th, 2022 meeting.
I have an issue.
Okay, certainly.
The section on page 1, discuss special legal counsel.
Mhm.
The third line down, for the record, Mr. Fitzgerald worked with her for 14 years ago. Mr. Hearn felt it was okay. I'm really not sure what that sentence means, and I propose we strike it.
I had indicated on the record that I had once been at Copeland and Page, and Lauren was there when I was there, but it's now 14 years or so.
Yeah,
And-
but, I see.
And Pat did not think that presented any.
Can we improve then that
Yep.
for the record?
So do you want to
Because I
suggest
don't-
language, Pat, that you would like it to reflect?
Yes, it should read perhaps Mr. Fitzgerald indicated that some 14 years ago, he worked at Copeland and Page when Miss Goldberg was there. And it was my opinion that for the passage of 14 years did not present a conflict of interest.
Okay, I move that we accept the minutes as amended.
One more
Oh,
question.
sorry.
Yep.
Thank you. Just on the section below that, in discuss the process, in the third line, at the end, second sentence starts there. They graded the municipal finances, made a draft, and then sent it to the board.
Oh, yeah.
So I think I would just strike that sentence
Mm-hmm.
that begins with they graded the municipal finances. and
Okay.
then
And
strike
to
it
where?
into-
From they graded the municipal
Just
finance,
that
how
full,
far
just
down?
just that full sentence. So then it,
Up to
Fine.
after
Mr.
the
Fitch-
period vote, after the word vote. Right.
yes, after vote.
Yep.
Up to Mr. Fitzgerald. Okay.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Any other further amendments, deletions, revisions? I will accept a motion to accept minutes as amended,
I will move that we approve the minutes as amended.
made by Member Hyde. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Member Cahill. We'll call the roll. Member Powers,
No,
is she ex officio also?
she's ex officio, yes.
Ex officio, that's right. All right. Member Cahill,
Yes.
Member Locknane,
Yes.
Member Hyde,
Yes,
and the chair also votes in the affirmative. So it is unanimously adopted. Minutes are accepted.
I move we adjourn.
Made by Member Hyde. Is there a second to the motion?
Second.
Seconded by Member Cahill. Call the roll. Member Cahill,
Yes.
Member Hyde,
Yes.
Member Locknane,
Yes.
and the chair also votes aye. And we are adjourned until May 24th. Thank you all. Thank you, Lauren. And we very much look forward to
Thank you,
working.
Lauren.
Thank you, Lauren.
Lauren, I'll be in contact with you.
Sounds good.
Thank you
Thanks
very
so
much.
much, guys.
Thank
Okay,
you,
good
Lauren.
night,
Thank you,
everyone.
everybody.
Thank you.
Everybody have a
Bye-bye.
good evening.
Bye.
Take care.